Right, comrades, I'd like to thank the organisers of this meeting. As the chair said, I was a member of the International Socialists, then the SWP, from December 1962. My membership came to an end in December last year. I'm not currently a member of any organisation. There are two things I think are very important. Firstly, that we should have a better understanding of our history, and secondly, that we should have fraternal exchange of views between different currents on the left. And I think this meeting today offers a chance to do both those things. Now, an awful lot of things happened in '68. It was a very exciting time to be alive. It's true, I think, that politics, sex and music are all better when you're 20 than when you're 70. But I don't think I'm romanticising too much when I think that, I was very lucky to be alive and active in 1968. I just want to pick up on three themes which I think are of importance. This isn't to suggest that other things that happened in '68 weren't important. Firstly, the question of Vietnam that Ernie has talked about. Now, I was actually, this is the credentials bit, on the very first demonstration against the Vietnam War in February 1965, which was called by an organisation Jane referred to, NALSO, Labour Students' Organisation, after Malcolm X had visited the LSE about 2 weeks before he was murdered. It was a very miserable little demonstration. There were about 500 of us. And the movement, for the first couple of years, the movement was under the leadership of the Communist Party and the Labour left, and really was a fairly miserable movement. Largely because it wouldn't actually raise any demands that actually enthused people. Not only were we not allowed to say victory to the National Liberation Front, I remember being told very authoritatively by a member of the Communist Party that we couldn't raise the demand troops out now because it would actually take a long time for them to get onto the boats. So I think we have to say it is very much to the credit of people like Ernie and the comrades around the IMG who built the Vietnam Solidarity Campaign into the very impressive movement it was by 1968. I have to say that it's probably true that the IS contribution was a little slow. I think there are good reasons for that. We were a very small group. We had to have priorities. We were heavily involved around the incomes policy argument and around tenants' organisations. But nonetheless, the credit there, I think, does go to the IMG comrades. Now, the second thing, which was mentioned by one speaker from the floor, that I think was absolutely crucial in 1968 was the Enoch Powell speech. Because one shouldn't have an image that it was all going one way in 1968. I want to quote from the book Dave Renton referred to, Dave Widgery's book On the Left in Britain, in which he quotes from a diary. It's not quite clear whether it's his own or somebody else's, but a diary written at the time. And this is the diary entry about the day after the Powell speech, the Rivers of Blood speech was made. I remember Nigel walking into the room with this Evening Standard headline, big and black and 2 inches high. He looked as if his best mate had just this moment snuffed it. We were just completely shocked numb. It was predictable in so many ways, and yet still quite shocking. You suddenly realised how little influence the left really had, how the roots of the political organisations like the Communist Party had been rotting in the soil, how pathetic the squabbling between groups all was, just how urgent things had become. I seemed to spend the next few days leafleting solidly, and I'll never forget the look on the faces of the Pakistani postmen when they read the leaflets and found out they weren't fascist. For those first few days after Powell, they were petrified, but so was I. And I think that catches the mood. We were very, very scared in that period. And I also want to mention, because I still take some considerable pride in this, what the International Socialists did at that point. We had one docker in membership. Remember, the dockers on all days, May Day, decided to strike in support of Enoch Powell. We had one comrade, Terry Barrett, who was a docker. Terry Barrett, with help of IS comrades, produced a leaflet and gave it out to the striking dockers. I just want to quote from it briefly, because it shows the way we tried to argue the case. Who is Enoch Powell? He's a right-wing Tory opportunist who will stop at nothing to help his party and his class. He is a director of the vast national discount company, Assets 224 million, which pays him a salary bigger than the 3,500 a year he gets as an MP. What does he believe in? Higher unemployment. He's consistently advocated a national average of 3% unemployed. Cuts in the social services. He wants higher health charges, less council houses, charges for state education and lower unemployment pay. Mass sackings in the docks. Again and again he has argued that the docks are grossly overmanned. Now, that didn't stop the strike, it didn't stop Powell. But it provided a focus for those people who wanted to stand up against Powellism, and I think it's almost certain that some of the people we attracted at that point went on a few years later to become key to building the Anti-Nazi League. But the IS also took another initiative, which I think is of interest, although it didn't have any immediate success, which was to launch a campaign for unity. A leaflet distributed with the May issue of Labour Worker bore the title "The Urgent Challenge of Fascism," and it called for the establishment of a united organisation on the basis of 4 points of principle. 1. Opposition to imperialism for the victory of all genuine national liberation movements. 2. Opposition to racism in all its forms and to controls on immigration. 3. Opposition to state control of trade unions, support for all progressive strikes. 4. Workers' control of society and industry as the only alternative to fascism. And I think that caught the mood of the time. I think when people saw Enoch Powell there, they were quite happy to link arms with people, even if those people believed such bizarre things as that Russia was a degenerated workers' state. Something I personally, have not been able to get my head around for a long time, but, everyone to their own taste. So we launched this appeal for unity. Now, and maybe Ernie can tell us more details, there were discussions with the IMG, but they eventually came to nothing. I think one of the sticking points was the question of Cuba, where the IMG wanted a much more, what shall we say, a much more developed defence of the Cuban Revolution. But anyhow, the result, and perhaps we're descending from the tragic to the farcical now, was what the actual result for IS was. You see, we wanted Tariq Ali. What we got was Sean McGowan. If you want to define a bad day's shopping, that sums it up. But anyhow, so we had a fusion with this very small group, and I think this is of some interest because it actually relates to current arguments that are still going on. Because we'd been a small organisation, we'd had lots of internal debates, but we'd never had factions before. By admitting the Workers' Fight Group, we actually accepted for the first time within the International Socialists an organised faction. and it was indeed an organised faction. The Magama Group had their own probationary membership, their own collection of subs, and their own internal democratic centralism. They were effectively a party within a party. And the situation lasted 3 years, was generally rather unhappy, and ended with their group being excluded. Now, the reason I mention this is because I think the question of factions is often raised in relation to the question of revolutionary democracy. Now, I've just spent a year as a member of a faction, and I have to say it was not the happiest year of my life. And I still remain convinced that although I think any organisation must allow the right of faction as a last resort, I don't think factions are the most helpful way of organising internal democracy. I think factions tend to polarise debates, whereas with genuine internal democracy, you have constant changes of alignment. You know, I may agree with Comrade here today on one point and be in virulent disagreement on another issue that comes up 3 months later. I think factions tend to polarise debate in that way. Now, a third...
5 minutes?
Sorry?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Yeah. Should be all right, yes. Good. Yes, where am we? Yes. Third issue was France. Now, Comrade asked, where did it all come from? I think it's very hard to say, and certainly the French events were totally unexpected. I think any of us, if we'd been asked on the 1st of May, you know, we'd been told, oh, within the next month you're going to see the biggest general strike in human history. We'd said, come on, you know, what planet are you living on? I think one of the crucial things, in fact, was Vietnam. I think the Tet Offensive actually showed, you know, that the Vietnamese were not victims, they actually had the possibility of winning. And I think once that idea gets communicated, it spreads very rapidly. And I think other things like the Irish question that people have raised, you know, that idea, once you see that people in one place are winning, you think, well, maybe we could win too. And I think you can see that in the dynamic in the events of France, the way that the government backed off against the students and reopened the Sorbonne. You know, when people saw they could win, they actually moved into action. But the other thing, of course, that the French events raised was the whole question of the role of the left. We saw that the left in some ways was very important in France, but at the same time it was small, it was fragmented, it wasn't able to offer a clear alternative to the policies of the Communist Party. And as a result, we had a very protracted internal debate within the IS over the next 6 months about the question of transforming our form of organisation and effectively proclaiming ourselves not as a revolutionary party but as an organisation aiming to build a revolutionary party. Now again, I think basically we were right. I wouldn't defend every single word that we decided then. I think basically we were right. What was needed was an interventionist organisation. We also decided to adopt a democratic centralist constitution. Again, I don't think that was wrong. I think the problem about democratic centralism is that in the broadest sense, actually almost any form of human organisation requires democratic centralism. You know, you can't hold a meeting like this unless you decide, well, we're starting at 1:30 and then you start at 1:30. You know, you know, democratic centralism in some sense is necessary. Whether all the things associated with democratic centralism in particular traditions and all the things associated with Leninism, and there isn't time to discuss this, but I think in many ways the whole notion of Leninism is a myth. Lenin was a great revolutionary. He actually changed his mind in different circumstances to such an extent that wrapping up Lenin into a little box called Leninism is scarcely possible. So I think there are important lessons to be drawn from that. I just want to conclude with one final point, which again may be relevant to arguments going on at the current time. You see, on the one hand, I think back to the VSC, and my memories are generally positive. Maybe, you know, I've forgotten things. Maybe Ernie will remind me of terrible rows we had. But in general, I think the IS comrades, the IMG, we had Maoists, we had black nationalists, we had all sorts of people, and generally we got on together pretty well. Just as a few years later, within the Anti-Nazi League, various currents worked together pretty well. On the other hand, I think of the experience of the formal fusion between the International Socialists and the Workers' Fight Group, the way that this had to be constitutionally embodied and very rapidly constitutionally disembodied. You know, I'm not at all sure that formal fusions are a very useful thing. I think if we can develop a pattern whereby different currents of the left you know, argue but work together in a fraternal fashion, it's perhaps more important than actually engaging in fusion negotiations. That's just a thought based on my probably rather hazy memories of 1968.